shutdown situation, the United States will lose $15 billion a week because members of Congress failed to agree on a new national budget, forcing the shutdown of government agencies. Before the weekend, the main national budget was not approved, so the work of ministries and agencies remains paralyzed. Dmitry Anopchenko found out in Washington whether this has affected negotiations with Ukraine and the supply of weapons.
Just like in a children's fairy tale, where at midnight the carriage turned into a pumpkin. At 12 o'clock a.m. on October 1st, U.S. government officials effectively lost the ability to work normally. Key ministries, including the Treasury, stopped working. The Pentagon sent 335,000 employees home. That's half of the entire civilian staff of the Department of Defense. Republicans and Democrats in Congress failed to reach an agreement on a number of expenditures. The country's budget stalled, a temporary one was not adopted, and now the corridors of power are almost empty. Democrats are also at home as of Wednesday without pay, and politicians are blaming each other for provoking the shutdown and dragging it out for political reasons.
Today we see Republicans playing the same games so they get the same results. And the question is whether they will change course.
And we know, and the Democrats know, they are not right. They have absolutely no reason to cause a shutdown. They're only doing this because of politics.
The official reason for everything happening now in the States is the disagreement over spending on healthcare and medical insurance for the underprivileged. But it's not hard to see the hidden part of the political iceberg. It's beneficial for the Democrats to highlight the inefficiency of Trump's team, as if to say this is what they've brought the country to.
Cruelty is the essence of all of Trump's and his administration's policies, and Americans know this. The vast majority of the country's residents have already come to the conclusion that America is moving in the wrong direction, and the price for this is too high.
But the Republicans were also prepared for such a turn of events. And they are using the shutdown for mass layoffs in the government apparatus, particularly targeting officials who remained in their positions from Biden's administration. From government agencies, Trump had already asked to prepare layoff plans for those who have so far only been sent on forced unpaid leave. And the president doesn't even try to hide it. He says so publicly. A government shutdown will allow them to purge the state apparatus of disloyal employees and reduce staff to the bare minimum necessary.
It's as clear as day. The Democrats are staging internal sabotage against the country and the American people themselves. And this madness has to end already.
But enough about internal squabbles. With the approach of the parliamentary elections in the States, they will only intensify. What matters more is how all this will affect Ukraine. And there are several threats. Negotiation processes, signing new agreements, and arms deliveries. The Pentagon and the NATO press service, as of now, have not responded to our requests or clarified officially how the shutdown has affected or might still affect the delivery of weapons to Ukraine that were paid for by the Europeans. Ukrainian diplomats assure that there are no delays since the previous package was approved before all these events. The Ukrainian technical negotiation mission, which arrived in Washington on the very day the shutdown began, and whose main task was precisely to hold talks with the U.S. Department of Defense regarding the drone agreement, thank you. They assure that they were able to hold their meetings. And now everything depends on how long the American shutdown will last. And the longest one, also under Trump, lasted for 35 days.
We have such chaos because the country is divided and polarized, because agreeing with opponents in the eyes of voters is seen as a sign of weakness. To make concessions is to play into the enemy's hands, so no one is willing to compromise.
Ukraine had planned to discuss 4 agreements in the next 2 to 3 weeks. These included security guarantees, drones, a free trade zone, and a major agreement on arms purchases worth nearly $90 billion. The plan was to reach an understanding by mid-October so that the Prime Minister's visit could take place in the 20s of the month and the documents could be signed. Top-level contacts are ongoing directly and everything is still happening now. But for the paperwork itself, you need officials, lower-level staff, bureaucrats, lawyers, those who work with documents, those who prepare analytics. And if employees of the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Commerce, the National Security Council, the State Department, and even partly the White House remain on forced leave for another week or 2, Ukrainian issues may also be delayed. So for us, it's clearly not a catastrophe, but it may be necessary to adjust our plans. If, as is the case now, the American elites are preoccupied only with internal squabbles. And the shutdown significantly strengthens Trump's personal position.
The president takes little pleasure in this. He did not want a shutdown. I heard this from him. I was in the Oval Office. But in a situation where Congress hasn't approved the budget, now it's in the hands of our commander-in-chief. It's the president's responsibility to decide how to spend funds and resources, so he doesn't complain.
And it's unlikely that the top official will suddenly change his mind and want to take this opportunity to allocate some tranche. More likely, he'll try to cut government spending even further. Therefore, the plan to shift from Biden's military aid to Trump's military procurements turned out to be the right one. Contracts, especially with Europeans, will be fulfilled despite any political storms, whereas aid could have been halted by a situation like the one currently happening in the US. From Washington, Dmitry Anopchenko, Serhiy Koval, American Bureau of Inter-TV Channel, Marathon United News.
Donald Trump holds a similar view. After meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky in New York, he compared the Russian economy to a paper tiger. However, assessments obtained by TSN-UA from leading German experts indicate that the situation is not so clear-cut. According to a specialist from one of the key analytical centers that advises the German government, support from China and other partners allows Russia to continue the war for at least another 2 to 3 years, perhaps in a less intensive format. He draws attention to the risks associated with payments to contract soldiers and predicts that the Kremlin will likely have to resort to a second wave of mobilization, as it did in the fall of 2022. Against the backdrop of new challenges, including the appearance of unidentified drones in NATO airspace, European politicians are calling for decisive action. European Commissioner for Defense Andrius Kubilius has proposed creating an anti-drone wall on the alliance's eastern flank. However, German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius, during the same forum, made it clear that this project is not a top priority, emphasizing the need to invest in the rapid development of new systems. After all, technology is rapidly becoming obsolete, and at the same time, experts warn that the threat lies not only in drones over NATO countries. At the beginning of September, a vessel was detained in the Kiel Canal in Germany on suspicion of being used for espionage operations. Kubilius confirmed that the threat from Russia's shadow fleet is quite real. According to him, there is a suspicion that Moscow may use these vessels for covert drone launches from containers. Moreover, on September 28, President Zelensky already confirmed that Russia is using tankers to launch drones against European countries. The head of state added that it is necessary to strike painfully with sanctions against the entire infrastructure of Russia's tanker fleet. Russian propaganda is once again spreading its narratives. Lavrov accuses Ukraine, the EU, and NATO of waging war against Russia, while Zakharova fantasizes that Kyiv is allegedly preparing a conflict between Moscow and the alliance using repaired Russian drones. But experts have long warned that the real risk lies elsewhere. The Baltic Sea could turn into yet another theater of military operations. Moscow is already testing red lines. It is launching unidentified drones, violating NATO airspace with its fighter jets, and pursuing two objectives at once. The first is to intimidate Europeans and force them to reduce military aid to Ukraine. The second is to create a pretext for strikes on logistics routes for transporting weapons by rail and at airports. Cyber attacks on these systems are already taking place. The Baltic Sea, through which over 60% of Russian oil exports pass, has effectively become an arena of hybrid warfare. Let us recall how, in December 2024, a Russian ship fired signal rockets at a Bundeswehr helicopter, or how the Russians constantly damage undersea cables and shamelessly escort their new fleet of tankers. In June, Moscow even sent a corvette and buoys with Oran missiles out to sea to cover the tankers. And when the Estonian Navy tried to stop the vessel, Russia sent Su-35 fighter jets there, which violated NATO airspace.